So, Zen 5 gaming performance. I know, I was also hoping we were done as well, but for those of you who aren't up to speed yet, here's just a really quick summary. AMD released the new Zen 5 based Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7 processors 2 weeks ago now, and for desktop users they were extremely underwhelming, delivering low single-digit performance gains over similar Zen 4 parts. This made for a very confusing review process because on one hand, we had AMD, who had already publicly claimed that Zen 5 processors would deliver gaming leadership, showing official performance slides featuring Zen 5 parts comfortably beating the likes of Intel's Core i9-14900K. So, with those sort of expectations already set, I couldn't really understand how at times the Ryzen 7 9700X was slower than the 7700X for gaming, and overall was just a few percent faster. Therefore, I naturally assumed that there was something wrong with maybe my test configuration or perhaps even my review sample. So I started reaching out to other reviewers, as well as AMD themselves. And in short, other reviewers who I trust, they were seeing similar results. But AMD seemed unable or unwilling to either confirm or deny the accuracy of my data. Pretty odd that. And instead, they just said it looked a little bit off. They stressed that they weren't claiming that my results were wrong, just that they were a little bit lower than what they were expecting. And naturally, this was both frustrating and confusing, as in my opinion, the data is either correct or incorrect. And making matters worse was the fact that AMD wouldn't even share their Ryzen 7 7700X results with me. They said they had the data, they just wouldn't share it with me. So on one hand, I had other reviewers confirming that my data was correct, and then I had AMD saying that, yeah, ballpark there, it's a little bit off, but they wouldn't tell me what they were seeing internally between the 7700X and 9700X. So the reviews went live, and outside of a few outliers, basically all the media outlets were reporting that the 9700X was between 2 to 5% faster than the 7700X, which really does mean that everyone was basically seeing the same results. And this was a big problem for AMD, who had previously claimed gaming leadership with these Zen 5 parts, making claims such as the 9700X was on average 13% faster than Intel's Core i7-14700K for gaming, but in reality, we found it was really 5% slower. And predictably, AMD received a huge amount of backlash for not just how disappointing Zen 5 was for desktop users, but justifiably for how bad they misled consumers leading up to the release. As a result of all of this, AMD was scrambling for answers, seemingly still believing their own BS. So they wanted to know why review data was a lot lower than their own data, and of course the expectations that they had set for these Zen 5 processors. But this is where things get very confusing. Very AMD. Shortly after the reviews went live, AMD reached out to us, asking for more information to help understand what's going on with Zen 5's gaming performance. And after a lot of back and forth, they asked us to test using a system administrator account, or the administrator account, as AMD believed this would boost Zen 5's gaming performance, as there is a bug with Windows 11. Now, I have made a dedicated video covering this issue, which you can go check out if you want, but in short, we did see multiple instances where Zen 5's gaming performance was greatly improved when using the system administrator account. However, I also took the time to test Zen 4 and found basically the same performance uplift, meaning this was not a Zen 5 specific issue at all, and it didn't explain why reviewers were finding such small performance gains for Zen 5 over Zen 4, despite AMD heavily implying that this was the issue. Since then, AMD has continued to talk with different reviewers, trying to understand why their own internal data is more favorable for Zen 5. So, I guess the next question is, what is AMD's internal data? They did eventually update their review guide after the 9700X and 9600X reviews went live, and they showed that the 9700X is just 5% faster for gaming than the 7700X, on average. They even showed a couple of instances where the 7700X was faster than the 9700X, just as the reviewers did. So based on that, you might think, well, case closed then, right? If we found a 3% margin in favor of the 9700X and AMD is showing a 5% margin, with a completely different sample of games, mind you, then surely there's no mystery here. Zen 5 just isn't that much faster than Zen 4 for gaming. Well, don't get too far ahead of yourself, because today AMD published a blog post on their website titled Ryzen 9000 Series Community Update Gaming Performance, where they seem to be insinuating that the reviews are wrong and only they can do accurate testing because, it's so hard and all that. But look, I'll let you be the judge of that. You can read the blog for yourself and come to your own conclusions, but we're still going to go through it. They start by explaining why AMD-generated gaming data differs from review data, and I just knew from that point this was going to be good. So here's what they said. For our Ryzen 9000 launch, AMD internal labs generated data that shows a 9% average generational uplift in 1080p gaming versus Ryzen 7000 series, and an average of 6% higher performance across more than 30 games when compared against the competition's best. Not all reviews are seeing these results, and this reflects the complexity of high-performance PC testing today, given the number of system and software variables. There are several factors specifically creating these differences in some Ryzen 9000 reviews. Now, there's a bit to unpack here. Firstly, AMD is now claiming that Zen 5 is on average 9% faster than Zen 4 for gaming, which is a bit odd because the review guide shows 5%, at least for the 9700X versus the 7700X. There are some other discrepancies depending on what models you're comparing, but I think the 8-core parts are probably the best ones to compare for gaming. Anyway, during the review process, they did say that our 3% uplift was only slightly off what they were seeing. But let's be honest here, 3% and 9% are very different numbers. If it is genuinely 9% faster on average, then I want to find out why we're not seeing that and correct that. Do an updated re-review and let you guys know. But anyway, we have the number now. It's 9% apparently. And presumably this means the 9700X should be, on average, offering a 9% gaming uplift from the 7700X. But wait, if we scroll just a little bit further down the page, AMD says, on a generational basis, Ryzen 9000 series delivers a 10% improvement in productivity and creative workloads, 25% improvement in AI workloads, and a 5 to 8% improvement in gaming over the Ryzen 7000 series. So now AMD saying Zen 5 is 5 to 8% faster than Zen 4 for gaming, which, by my calculations, that's less than 9%. That's less than a 9% uplift on average. So again, the review guide is showing a 5% average uplift for the 9700X over the 7700X. It is showing 8% uplift for the 9950X over the 7950X, though there is some obviously very bad data there. So it still seems as though AMD themselves don't actually know where Zen 5 stands in terms of gaming performance, which is pretty embarrassing stuff. For example, AMD's own internal testing claims that the 9700X is 144% faster than the 7700X in League of Legends, but then 24% slower in Metro Exodus. And I've since tested both of those games, and I can assure you that that data is very, very wrong. There's also loads of missing Zen 4 data points, so again, I'm not sure what's going on there. And this is a problem with, in my opinion, lazy automated testing. They're simply copying and pasting the automatically generated data and just throwing it into an Excel spreadsheet or PDF file. Also, what's the deal with all of those decimal places, guys? Trust me, you don't need that many. But getting back to the opening statement, AMD said, not all reviews are seeing these results, and this reflects the complexity of high-performance PC testing today, given the number of systems and software variables. There are several factors specifically creating these differences in some Ryzen 9000 reviews. This to me sounds a bit condescending, but as I said, read into this how you would like to. But to me, AMD is suggesting that this testing is just so difficult, and therefore it's really not surprising that reviewers have published incorrect data, which is rich coming from a company that does automated gaming benchmarks that almost exclusively focus on games with built-in benchmarks, which is generally the worst way to test CPU performance in games. Running a canned or built-in benchmark, it's not complex or difficult. In fact, they're made to be as easy as possible. They're meant to be user-friendly, given that they're designed for users, so gamers, to quickly and easily assess roughly the performance of their system in that game. and generally they focus on GPU performance and not CPU performance. But just to give you some insight here, AMD benchmarked the 9700X using built-in benchmarks for titles such as Ashes of the Singularity, the meme benchmark game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Again, the built-in benchmark for that particular game is very GPU limited. It's not a very good CPU test. Just the village section towards the end there measures CPU performance. So overall, not a good test there. Middle-earth, Shadow of War, old game, not a good one for testing CPU performance, at least not modern CPUs. Hitman 3, again, canned benchmark, not a great CPU test there. Far Cry 6, canned benchmark, Dirt 5, and then we've got Borderlands 3. And these games were included in their 23-game sample that AMD used for testing. And of the 23-game sample, just 2, I'll repeat this, of the 23 games that AMD used for benchmarking, just 2 of them were released in the last 2 years. So that hardly seems like a well-rounded gaming test suite to me. AMD also went on to say that the AMD Gaming Test Suite includes a broad set of esports, AAA, and popular older games, which are a combination of CPU and GPU-bound titles. Game performance conclusions can be influenced significantly by the makeup of the test suite. But there's nothing impressive about AMD's Gaming Test Suite. They're not doing anything special here. Unusual, sure. Again, testing with just 2 modern titles is a bit of a bizarre choice for testing the latest and greatest CPU architecture. And just to be clear here, AMD isn't testing their latest and greatest CPUs in demanding and modern AAA games, such as Baldur's Gate 3, The Last of Us Part 1, Hogwarts Legacy, Spider-Man Remastered, Homeworld 3, A Plague Tale Requiem, Starfield, and Horizon Forbidden West, for example. Now, one of the better games AMD has used for testing, it's still an older one, at least when it was originally released, that's Cyberpunk 2077, but this is a great game to use for CPU benchmarking. It's very demanding, but again, they are using the built-in benchmark and not actual in-game performance. And using the built-in benchmark, the 9700XC CPU utilization hovering around 60%, and the average frame rate is a little over 200 FPS. Whereas using the in-game section of the game that we use for testing, utilization hovers above 80%, and that's despite the frame rate being significantly lower at around 150 FPS. So although I don't think this is a key factor to the differing results, not that I'm even that sure that there is much of a difference in results here, we're talking about low single-digit performance differences, but anyway, in my opinion, AMD's test method is worse than ours in the sense that it's not actually looking at in-game performance. The built-in benchmark is easier to execute, it requires a lot less work, and of course it is more conducive for automated testing, which is of course why they do it, but it's by no means more accurate, realistic, or anything along those lines. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite. Now let's change gears for a second, because AMD self-snitches while trying to weasel out of those ridiculous marketing claims of Zen 5's gaming performance. When talking about their internal data comparing Zen 5 and Intel's Raptor Lake refresh processors, AMD says this: AMD tested Intel configurations using comparable DDR5 6000 memory, as well as Intel default settings, baseline power profile, which can have a small impact on gaming performance. This must mean that AMD were testing Intel's unlocked K-SKU processors with a 125 watt long duration power limit, as I'm really not sure what else baseline power profile could mean. It's not the performance profile or the extreme profile, which they probably should have been using. And to give some further clarification on this, they went on to say, when comparing to the competition using optimal settings, higher memory speed and extreme power delivery profile for the competition and Windows 11 version 24H2 for both, we see a double-digit lead for Ryzen 9000 series in productivity and creator applications, 30% lead in AI workloads, and parity in gaming using the most popular games included in the reviews. So AMD is admitting that for the marketing slides, they did nerf Intel's processors by loading non-default profiles to reduce performance below what you would see out of the box. But under default conditions, which use the extreme profile for K-SKU parts, so how we tested the Intel processors, they saw parity in gaming. which is still wrong. The 9700X does not match the 14700K and even the 14900K, of course, but I guess that's not what is important here. What is important to note here is that AMD are admitting to manually manipulating the results for marketing by using a power spec that Intel themselves have publicly stated is not intended or should not be used with K-SKU parts. This is some seriously dirty stuff from AMD. They are clearly manipulating the data. So that's really bad. But let's move on, because there's more. AMD also stated the following. The Zen 5 architecture incorporates a wider branch prediction capacity than prior Zen generations. Our automated test methodology was run in admin mode, which produced results that reflect branch prediction code optimizations not present in the version of Windows reviewers used to test Ryzen 9000 series. We have a further update on accessing this performance for users below. So this part circles back to the testing we've already done with the administrator account on Windows 11, where we saw good performance gains in some games for both Zen 4 and Zen 5. However, it now seems AMD is fully pushing the narrative that this Windows bug affects Zen 5's gaming performance, and this is why reviewers found different margins to AMD. And that is complete and utter BS. AMD also goes on to explain how gamers can unlock the best performance for Zen 5 by using Windows 11 version 24H2 via the Windows Insider program, which includes the optimized AMD-specific branch prediction code. But this won't just unlock the best performance for Zen 5, it will do the same for Zen 4. In fact, if you scroll down to what is almost the fine print, AMD even states that Zen 5 will see the biggest boost, but this Windows update will improve performance for Zen 4 and Zen 3 as well. Now, they go on to say they're collaborating with Microsoft to roll this optional update out to all Windows users soon. This is one of those technically true statements, but really it's more misleading than it is true. AMD is trying to make it sound like a Zen 5 focused fix. And while we did find that it benefited Zen 5 more than Zen 4, we're talking about a 1% margin here. So in other words, scaling is basically the same. And this is where it all gets very confusing. Because AMD is claiming that they use the system administrator account, which solves the Windows performance issues for gaming, and therefore this is the reason why they're seeing bigger margins for Zen 5 over Zen 4 than the reviewers are, though they're still not sure what the margin is. Is it 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%, maybe 9%? AMD's probably still working that out. At least that's what it seems like. But all of that noise aside, it's confusing because we found that Zen 4 and Zen 5 offer roughly the same performance uplift when going from the local administrator account to the system administrator account. So if they're progressing at the same rate going from one to the other, like if scaling is the same, how does that account for the difference between the reviews and AMD's own internal testing? Now, the only way that would, I guess, sort of make sense is if AMD were testing the 7700X on the local administrator account and then the 9700X on the system administrator account, which I suppose would be an even bigger issue if that was true. And I don't believe they were doing that, as their automated software requires that they use the system administrator account. But the point is, with scaling between the two accounts being the same for Zen 4 and Zen 5, this cannot explain the discrepancy between the reviews and AMD's own testing data. Also, really does beg the question, why is AMD testing CPUs in a way that no one should or would use them? You shouldn't use the system administrator account, as it's far less secure than the local administrator account. So why is AMD testing in an environment that no gamer would use, and then not making this clear to reviewers? Moreover, even if what AMD is claiming here was true, which it isn't, there are still issues when they say stuff like this. Our automated test methodology was run in admin mode, which produced results that reflect branch prediction code optimizations not present in the version of Windows reviewers used to test the Ryzen 9000 series. This issue is still 100% on AMD. Like, how did they screw this up so badly? Releasing CPUs that require a Windows update to work correctly? I know it's not the first time, but then only to discover this after the reviews went live? Have they got any idea what's going on with these CPUs? Did no one just benchmark them or test them, on a normal Windows install, like on a regular PC. So I'm not sure how much testing they do of these things before they end up releasing them to the wild. Of course, none of this is the reason why Zen 5 is so underwhelming for gaming, and AMD trying to pin it on this it isn't a good look for them anyway, and it certainly doesn't save Zen 5. At the end of the day, AMD is scrambling to save face here because they massively misrepresented the gaming performance of Zen 5. As a result, sales have been horrific, and I really can't put into words how bad the sales have been. They're basically not selling these things at this point, which is pretty insane for a new generation of Ryzen processors. The flop is real. And that is going to do it for this sort of update video on this situation. It may seem like it, but trust me, I do not enjoy making this content. I would rather Zen 5 have been great, tell you how amazing the CPUs are, start doing big benchmarks, comparing them with previous generation CPUs, upgrade guides, looking at the new 800 series motherboards, which I don't think I'm even going to bother doing. I know quite a few of you are interested in that, but probably just get a 600 series board. You know, live stream builds. There's so much content we would like to do with Zen 5, but it just does not seem like it's worth it. So none of this is exciting or fun for us. We're not enjoying it. And it's been poorly handled by AMD. So hopefully we can see this sort of stuff improved in the future. But yeah, it's disappointing stuff, guys. So yeah, anyway, I'm just going to wrap this one up here. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.